So, last week, Bungie announced our next big content drop, Season of the Wish. This season might end up being the longest season that we've ever had in Destiny, so I wanted to take some time to talk about what has made seasons good in the past, whether that's from the featured seasonal activity, a brand new dungeon or raid, new exotics, and, of course, what I would personally like to see explored in the upcoming season. Maybe we call it my Season of the Wish Wishlist. Hey everyone, I'm Rizeki, and welcome to my design discussion of seasons in Destiny 2. If you're stopping in for the first time, welcome! We do weekly design videos about Destiny here, so if you like what you see, remember to subscribe and drop a like on the video so you can continue to get more Destiny videos dropped right into your YouTube feed. And also, we're getting really close to 500 subscribers on YouTube, so if you want to help get me there, that would be greatly appreciated, and I'd love to have you around. And as always, if you have any ideas of your own while watching the video, definitely leave them in the comment section below, or you could join our Discord server linked in the description of the video, where you could talk to me and other Guardians whenever you'd like. And with all that out of the way, let's get to talking about seasons in Destiny 2. We can't talk about what I want to see in Season of the Wish without first talking about what made previous seasons either good or bad. I'll only be looking at seasons recently released, so either Witch Queen or Lightfall seasons, since they're going to be the freshest in everyone's mind. Typically, the menu for seasonal content in Destiny is as follows: a new seasonal activity or playlist, a multi-week story and quest, a set of new weapons and armor, a handful of new exotics, both weapons and armor, a new raid or dungeon, a season pass, as well as any special goodies that Bungie may want to throw in, like an exotic mission, balance updates, a new PvP game mode, etc. By the way, I know the dungeon or raid is technically not part of the season, but since they're released in the same time window, I'll be including them in the season. Pretty much every season has these features, and each one has varying levels of success. I'll be going through each of these topics and highlighting seasons that did particularly well, or that needed improvement in some way. We can start with the seasonal activity, since this is where most players will be spending the majority of their playtime. This is where much of the weekly quest will be taking place, and it's also where you're going to be grinding out those fancy new seasonal weapons and armor as well. A good seasonal activity needs to hit a couple of key design points for it to be really good. Since we already alluded to it before, we want the seasonal activity to be very replayable. We will be grinding the heck out of it after all, so let's look at a seasonal activity that doesn't really hit this mark, and then we'll compare it to something that I think did really well. Season of the Plunder introduced us to the Catch Crash and Expedition activities alongside our trusty new Arc 3.0 update. I don't want to speak for everyone here, but the general consensus within my fire team was that Plunder was one of the more boring seasons we had recently, and a lot of that I think was specifically because of the activities provided. Expedition was alright and was a fairly quick activity to complete, and also gave us an easy way to target specific loot to farm while doing it. The activity I want to specifically talk about, though, is Catch Crash. Catch Crash was the main seasonal activity and tasked 6 players with running through a fallen pirate ship to collect rewards at the end. Each run you would start with a short boarding section, then you would race through multiple different rooms in the catch before confronting a boss at the end. The order of the rooms would be random, and the 3 final boss options rotated out each week. Catch Crash was kind of a slog. It was a fairly long activity, and although the room order was random, it was the same rooms over and over again, and you would pretty much do the same thing in each room, with honestly the only unique feature being the room where you needed to destroy ether tanks. After running this activity a few times, no one really wanted to play it anymore. They didn't want to fight the same enemies in the same rooms with the same mechanics over and over again. But what about an activity that was done really well? I think my personal favorite seasonal activity has been Deep Dives from the Season of the Deep. Deep Dives had a lot of replayability, and a lot of that had to do with the ability to select your difficulty with pressure trials, and also the really unique roguelite system of Asa's gifts. When playing through Deep Dives normally, each level you would be presented with 2 options of buffs that would change how you play. I would say most of these were pretty simple, but I think that's fine, especially for a version 1 of this system. You had things like Grenade Accelerant, which boosted your grenade charge, damage boosts for different energy types, etc. Each run would give you a different random selection of these, and it caused the gameplay to be slightly different each time you played the activity. The other big inclusion was Pressure Trials, which was essentially an elected difficulty setting during the activity. Each level of every member of your fire team interacted with the Toland, or I don't even know what it's specifically called in this activity, but it's Toland, trust me, you would cause an extra task at the end of the level to start, which was a challenging timed event. Completing each pressure trial would unlock greater and greater rewards at the end of the activity. This was great since it provided players across the skill spectrum with different ways to interact with the activity, and also made it much more interesting to try and go deeper and deeper, while the difficulty could be adjusted to whatever was best for your team. To add some extra spice to deep dives, it was also the entrance to the exotic mission for Wicked Implement. So you had yet another potential option for how you wanted to complete the activity. Having mechanics that greatly increase the replayability of a seasonal activity is what makes them more engaging to play. And I think we've seen Bungie exploring that a bit more with activities such as Altars of Summoning in the current season, Season of the Witch. The seasonal story and associated missions are usually nothing insane, but should be interesting enough to give players a reason to log in each week to experience them. I think the weekly story missions need to have two components, one being the content of the story and or lore, and then the second being the actual mission you need to complete each week. In my opinion, Season of the Seraph had probably the best weekly missions among the recent season releases. Each week, we would do a run or two of the seasonal activity, Heist Battlegrounds, which, by the way, is now part of the regular Vanguard Strikes playlist, so it was a pretty good activity on its own. And then we would infiltrate a Seraph Complex, which was different each week, but I'm pretty sure they also skipped a few weeks for this occasionally, but I can't remember. This was done really well since each week had something new to do, and the story was very impactful to the overall lore of Destiny. Although this may have been in part because the season was the lead up to Lightfall, but even though the story doesn't have to be as impactful as the one in Seraph, it should still be intriguing enough to encourage players to come back each week. I also think Season of the Witch did a pretty good job with this. On the flip side, we have Season of Plunder again. Plunder's story was alright, and had implications in the lore of Nezarec and the Elixni, but it felt somewhat unimportant to what we were actually doing during the Witch Queen expansion. There wasn't much reason for our Guardian to be involved in the events other than Aramis coming back and trying to collect the parts of Nezarec, which is pretty important to stop, by the way, but it didn't feel very connected to the story from the previous season, or even that of the Witch Queen as a whole. We did have some new locations to visit, which was nice. I'm not bothered that they were just reskinned lost sectors. I think that's fine for reusing content. My only real issue with Plunder was how disconnected the story felt in comparison to the surrounding seasons, especially since it was released right after Season of the Haunted, which had very important plot points. Again, we want the story to feel important and give us some level of investment to encourage us to play each week of the season. On to the loot! We talked a lot about loot in my previous video, but we could quickly go over what a season should provide in terms of loot. We usually get a set of weapons, armor, and one new exotic armor piece per class. Although I don't expect all the weapons released to be meta or super powerful, I would like them to have some interesting roles or some unique archetype that gives me a reason to farm for them and get all the red borders. Season of the Haunted had an amazing selection of weapons available from the seasonal vendor, such as Callus Mini Tool and Bump in the Night. These weapons were very strong, and Callus Mini Tool in particular had a place in both PvE and PvP, giving everyone a reason to seek it out no matter which game mode you primarily played. The regular armor set is pretty much just there for cosmetic reasons, since it's just a standard set of armor, so there's not too much to say on it. However, I'd like to see really cool armor pieces released, and I think the ones we saw in the Season of the Wish promotional art looked pretty solid. I would say Bungie usually does a pretty good job on both the seasonal armor and the armor from the Season Pass, so again, I don't really have too much to say here. What I think is far more important is the new exotic armor released for each class. Season of the Witch had a really good set of exotic armor. Hunters were given Mothkeeper's Wraps, Warlocks got Briarbinds, and Titans got Pyrogale Gauntlets. Each of these exotics were really fun to use, and some, like Pyrogale, even got used in the Day 1 race for Crota's End due to how strong they were for burst DPS. Mothkeepers weren't the strongest armor ever, but gave Hunters the chance to literally play as a Hive Boomer, and they worked well with every subclass, so there were a ton of different options for how to use them. Briarbinds are probably my favorite of the bunch, as they gave Warlocks a really fun new gameplay loop of juggling tons of Child of the Old Gods around the battlefield. I would expect that a season should give us exotic armor that is related in some way to the theme of the season. I mean, just look at Mothkeepers, you literally become a hive, and it should either provide a unique new playstyle or just be a strong option to use in a build. For our last stop, let's talk about dungeon releases. Like I said earlier, the dungeon is technically a separate content drop from the season itself, but it's usually tied into the season's narrative and is released within the season's time frame, so I'm including it. I don't care what Bungie says. All 3 of the dungeons recently released, Duality, Spire of the Watcher, and Ghost of the Deep, were actually really good. Even though me and my buddy played Duality to death for a role of Lingering Dread that still hasn't dropped for him. Sorry, Ray, if you're watching this, you'll get your auto-loading chill clip drop soon, I promise. But overall, what would I like to see in a dungeon is really simple. Give me good loot, a cool setting, some great encounters, and a fun but not overly long traversal section. Overall, Ghost of the Deep is probably my favorite dungeon among the 3 that I listed. Starting with the loot, we have a lot of good weapons to find. Cold Comfort is one of the best burst DPS rocket launchers in the entire game. New Pacific Epitaph is one of the first stasis wave frames. And of course, we have the dungeon exotic, the Navigator, which is not only a great support style weapon, but it's also the first strand trace rifle. The premise of the dungeon is great. I won't spoil it for those who have yet to complete it, but in general, we're exploring the depths of the arcology on Titan to stop the Hive from doing something. Something that would have been really bad for us if they ended up succeeding. The second and third encounters are really good, excellent enemy density, challenging mechanics, and it was very fun to learn how to do going in blind. I highly recommend trying it blind if you have yet to complete it. By the way, it's really fun. My biggest issue with Ghost of the Deep is the traversal sections. Although not really annoying, they take way too long in my opinion and could have been shortened a bit to streamline getting from the first encounter to the second encounter. Spire of the Watcher was excellent but had the opposite issue. The encounters were a little bit lacking, not bad, but not nearly as in-depth as Ghost. But the traversal between each encounter was pretty fast in return. So, with everything said, what am I looking for in the Season of the Wish? What's my wish list? I just want the best of all of the above. I want the story to wow me each week. We've already started off strong with the end of Season of the Witch revealing the Ahamkara egg and the 15th wish. And the sequel to the season is going to be the final shape. So if they follow the example set by Season of the Seraph's narrative and lead up to Lightfall, we should be teed up for a pretty great seasonal story each week. Let's get a seasonal activity that's fresh and interesting on each playthrough. Let's get some more roguelite elements or another difficulty selector like Deep Dives had with its pressure trials. I want to play the seasonal activity because it's fun to replay, not just because I want to grind it out for weapons. But we also want some great weapons, of course. I want unique weapons with interesting perk combinations that will make me want to find a bunch of different roles to try in both PvE and PvP. Give me a fun new exotic armor piece to change how I play the game, or maybe something to shore up missing synergies, like with Stasis. Titans, I'm looking at you. Maybe tie it in with the lore of the Ahamkaras to give it some extra flavor. And lastly, give me a really great dungeon experience that gets me excited to drop in on the launch day and keeps me coming back for great loot and great encounters. And for my real last wish, give me a reason to be hyped for the final shape and keep me hyped and excited during the entirety of this probably really long season. With all that said, maybe this is just my opinion. What did you guys think? Do you want to see the same things as me? Maybe something different? Let me know in the comments down below. You could also join the Discord to discuss the upcoming Season of the Wish with me and other Guardians. And don't forget to drop a like and subscribe if you liked the video. Like I said earlier, we're so close to 500, and your help to get to that milestone would be greatly appreciated. But that's about it. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, I've been Rizeki. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.